So, for those of you who don't know us, I'm Jane Daly.
I'm Siobhán Bourke.
And we're the co-directors of the Irish Theatre Institute. And we're going to be making a short and condensed draft presentation on a report we're working on, drawn from the Irish Playography project called At Play, which is looking at the work for new writing for children for the ages 4 to 12 years of age. Before I do that, I want to tell you a bit about what Irish Theatre Institute is. And I was saying, I woke up this morning with a terrible cold, and I feel like a character in a Christmas play for children, you know, with this kind of big red nose. So excuse me if I sneeze, cough, or splutter in the course of this presentation. Irish Theatre Institute is a resource organisation for Irish theatre makers, theatre artists, producers, and creatives. We deliver a number of artist support schemes focusing on areas of mentoring, production supports and resourcing and supporting people's ideas and ambitions. Some of these include the Six in the Attic programme that we've been running for a number of years, Prime, which is a programme that is aimed at older actors from the age of 55 to 80. And we had one participant in that programme who actually lied about her age, turned out she was 82. And we also have one that we're running actually here between the Town Hall Theatre in Galway and our base in Dublin called Elevator, which is for emerging and trainee producers. So we have a very artist-focused approach to all of the work that we do. And within that sits the writer. And the writer has, for a very long time, been at the core of Irish theatre. We're closely aligned with many of the artists that go through our programmes over the years, and we retain what we call our Six in the Attic alumni, so that we continue working with artists after they formally leave the programmes that we run. And delighted that we're in this here, because Theatre Lovett was one of the first participants on the first cycle of the Six in the Attic programme, and we've watched them go on to extraordinary developments in the last number of years. And we also work with an artist you might know well called Paul Curley, and we're involved in the making of his first show, Bake, which has subsequently toured to Hong Kong, Taipei, London, and it will travel further in coming years. But you don't want to hear about all of that, which is fabulous. You want to hear about this report and the Irish Playography. It's one of our core programmes. We've been working on it since 2001. And we consistently update it, enhance it, and develop based on the technological supports that are required for an online resource like this. But I'll hand over to Siobhán, and she's going to tell you.
Yeah, we're going to bat it over and back, so hope you won't get too bored with either of us. So the first thing to say is that Playography Ireland is an online database of the new play repertoire for Ireland going back to 1901. It's in two languages. It contains the English language play repertoire and the Irish language play repertoire. There are in total about 4,800 entries for the two languages. About a sixth of the player in the Irish language, of the plays in the database are in the Irish language, and 5/6 are in the English language. For the last number of years, well, probably since the last 10 years, we've published from time to time findings reports. These are statistical reports which we gather information that's in the database and we share with the sector. So we have done one on a big one on the writing in the Irish language called Playography na Gaeilge, and a booklet to accompany it, and we've done one on gender statistics recently that complements the Waking the Feminist report. And we've done one earlier on. We did one on for each of the phases, back to 1975, back to 1950, and back to the start, 1901 or 1904. We've been talking about doing this for an awful long time. This is still only a draft. There's a lot of questions, a lot of things we still have gaps in the information. We're still trying to source some of that information, and later on we'll actually talk to you specifically about that. But what we gathered for today was the information that we have currently in the playography for both languages going back to 1975. And the first graph I'm going to show you is a graph of the chronology. So these are going back to 1975, the chronology of the number of new plays that have been produced how do we define a new play? This is a new piece of writing. It could, at the present, does not include plays that are non-verbal. It doesn't include puppet shows, by extension, if they have no language. So, so you can see from this graph that we have. You can probably divide it into 2 phases. You can see that from 75, which is on Jane's side, to more or less halfway through 1994, the first 20 years, you're looking at an average of around 2 to 2.5 plays a year. And then from 95 to the present, you're looking at more like 6 plays, or 6, nearly going to 7 plays on average a year. There's 1 year missing, and the reason it's missing is because the way our stats were gathered, and that's 1987. In 1987, there were no new plays. Not quite sure what happened in 1987. We were still in probably coming, it was still by the tail end of that recession, wasn't it? We had anyway. So there was no new plays in 1987, and then you have loads of 1 play in 1986 and in 2009, which was another moment, and a high in 2004 of 13 plays. So we look at those figures and we're asking ourselves all sorts of questions, about that. I don't think we have lots of answers for you now, but we put them up there and we're trying to work out what was going on in that first phase, what was going on in the second phase. I mean, clearly it would seem to us, and we're not experts in work for children, you guys are, this is for work. These are only the plays that are written for the age group 4 to 12. They are currently 183 of them in our database. We picked 1975 because all our findings reports start in 1975. There were 2 companies formed in 1975, and we consider them both equally important. One was Druid, where we are now, and the other was Team, more or less set up in the same year. And so we've always gone back to 75 from a research point of view. Everything starts from 75. So you've got that early phase, and later on you'll see the various companies who kind of dominate that. And then I suppose I meant to take that again. Did that come on? There it is. So 7% of the total repertoire of the 4,800 plays that are in it are plays for children in this period, 1975 to 2014. And then obviously recently, the early period, as I said, was Teen, and middle period had the Ark. You also had Barnstorm. You had Cahoots and Big Telly, and I don't want to name everybody now, but more recently then you would have had Theatre Lovett and Branner and people like Paul were mentioned. What we're really seeing is that there's a few companies who've been consistent throughout the period, who are constantly doing new plays for children.
Just to go back for a moment to the definition of a new play. So these are new plays that were written, whether it was a playwright or it was co-authored in this 40-year period. It also includes adaptations, new adaptations or translations of work, of extant work that was translated, adapted by a playwright. But it doesn't include plays from the extant repertoire that were produced as well. So one of the reasons there might be no production in 1987 was because somebody did a production, one of the production companies did a play from the existing repertoire that wasn't a world premiere. Our report is all based on world premieres of new Irish writing in either English or Irish. So this graph is, the total number of plays for children by decade, and as Siobhán said already, there's a peak that comes in that period. The next sorry, I'm not used to a map.
There you go.
So the interesting thing is, when we looked at the breakdown for Irish language, of the 180 new plays in that 40-year period, 29 of the plays were in Irish, which was 16% of the total. Interestingly, in the whole playography for that 40-year period, which is in fact from 75 to 2016, is a bit of a fright, I thought. Because there wasn't the sound. There were about 2,400 plays in the repertoire between 1975 and 2016. The totality from 1901 is 4,800. So we actually had more plays produced in the Irish language in this period for children than in the entire repertoire. So for some reason, there was an increase in this period, and these are one of the things that we need to have a look at, and we need to try and. An audience like this is really valuable to us because we don't have access to the insides of your minds and your practice and your experience. So we will hopefully subsequently be calling on some of you to fill the sort of gaps that we have. So the companies that were producing that work in the Irish language were, of course, Branner, or currently are, also Delft Productions that was in existence in the late 80s and early 90s, on Tyvark, which a lot of our Irish language repertoire report covers the work in on Tyvark, and of course Graffiti in Cork has consistently produced new plays in Irish since 1999 and had a strategy at one time of guaranteeing to do one Irish language play a year. So, Siobhán, who are the most prolific writers, directors and designers?
Okay, we start with the writers. Forgive us now for our ducks, but we were trying to
non-gender specific.
Non-gender specific, animate it a little bit. So we run through the stats and all the fields, and this is what it came out as. And I suspect this isn't going to be a surprise to many of you in the room. This is this period, the period from 1975 to the present. And you can see they represent individuals who, many of whom are closely associated with companies, specific companies, and many of whom were very active in certain periods, like I'm thinking Mary Elizabeth Bourke Jane Daly was clearly very active at one particular time, and Maeve Inglesby also was very active for a number of years and with a number of companies.
Would you like to have a couple of these people in the room? Or
we are, absolutely. Earlier. I'm going to go back on that just for 1 second, just to say to you that 9 writers of the 183 plays, 9 writers have 5 or more plays in this, and that 10 of Maeve's were actually produced by Barnstorm. And then in the more recent times, obviously Paul, Bosco and Mark, and they're all listed there, have all had many plays produced. We have not included co-authored plays here. I have a graph of it in my notes. If anybody had questions about co-authored, and the reason we haven't is that we're not convinced we've got complete information, so this is one of the ones that we will be sending to people. We also have, I think, gaps. We definitely have gaps in our devised. So where that happens, that would happen when our research methodology is you must send us your programme, and we'll discuss more about that later. So what would happen is we might get in the programme, and you could get a programme like this one here for The Little Mermaid, and I brought things here for people to see, just the previous materials that were made, which would have a complete listing of everything. Then you could get another one, and I'm not saying this, there's picking up my hand, which might say devised by the company. And therefore we're stuck with devised by the company. It doesn't necessarily say the writers who were that, or doesn't say the company in brackets and lists all their names. So there are issues with some of those entries, and we're aware of them. And then the next one is to talk about the breakdown, total plays for children, and the male-female breakdown between directors, which is...
The interesting thing that we're finding as we're going through this, and it's a question really, we don't have any kind of complete outcome on this, but you'd be aware of the gender stats as a result of the Waking Feminist campaign and the analysis of the gender breakdown across writers, directors, designers, etc. And we're finding so far that it's more on a par in the work for children at this age group in this period. So it's kind of it leads questions to further analysis of, is this sector more gender balanced than other sectors? So for every piece of information that we uncover, we're finding a new question to address.
Yeah. And so the other issue with this stat, and why we're still calling all this information draft, is that we are missing director credits on some of the programmes. And of the 183, there's at least 12 entries where we do not have the director. So those are other cases where we will be coming back to people going, have you any recollection who's the director? Do you have any evidence for that? So just to say that, so I'm not saying that 12 would actually radically change those numbers, but it means that there are issues. It's one of the gaps we face. Next one is, these are the most prolific. The first thing you'll all realise when you glance at that is most of these people are closely associated with the companies that they run. They're essentially artistic directors. And Emily's long association with the companies she set up, Graffiti, Philip with Barnstorm, Paul Bosco with Cahoots, Richard, Zoe, Susie and Martin, as you know, were directors of Team. So if you put that together, the team numbers would be quite high as well.
And the other thing we're finding is that the playography is an all-island project, and there's very good balance between the activity in the north of Ireland and the activity in the south of Ireland in terms of the breakdown, in terms of the people who are represented on these kind of charts of who are most prolific. Yeah, and also in the last 10 years, the people who directed the most plays, from the information we have, allowing for the gaps, are Paul Bosco McNeely, Myrna Hearn, Philip Hardy and Mark McLaughlin. And then Emily is still there, Sarah Argent, John Breen and a few others are hovering, as well as having done a number of plays. Next one, median cast. Again, kind of interesting in terms of stats in another piece of research that was done earlier in the year. But what we do know is that there's a huge amount of doubling up goes on in work for children. But generally, the median cast of the 183 plays we've uncovered and taken out of the playography is that it was an average 2 male, 2 female cast. That's actors, not characters. Next up, and who were those actors? Yes. So in the last 10 years, or sorry, the last 40 years, Louis on the top of the list, he hasn't been doing it for 40 years, but the interesting thing about this, because it kind of blows my previous theory out of the water, is they're all men. So the most frequently occurring actors in the new plays, the top 5 are male actors. Louis Lovett, not all of the work with Theatre Lovett, but this is an area that Louis specialises in, and this is in the recent past. Hugh Brown is a Northern Irish based actor. John O'Loughlin, who this would have been in Team,
and in the Abbey.
In Team and in the Abbey early on in his career. Guy Carlton, again, Team Theatre Company. You were looking at the 1970s and 80s, and Jack Walsh around the same period of time. So actors were, they had kind of core, companies like Team had a core of actors. They weren't an ensemble, but there was a core of actors that worked regularly with Team Theatre Company. Now we did, in the spirit of fairness, say, right, well there must have been some women in these. If the average cast was two of each, there must have been some women who had a significant number of credits, and there were nine women that had 4 play credits each in this period. Again, Sheila O'Kane, who's been largely working in the north of Ireland, Maura Greeny, who was with Branner, as far as Susie Kennedy, who not only did she direct, but she also performed in some of the team work. Joe Donnelly was replay, Aoife O'Byrne, Barnstorm and Team, Gina Moxley, Team, Helen Walsh, Barnstorm and Team, Fiona McConnell at the Abbey, and Jodie O'Neill at Graffiti. Each of those had 4 credits each in this period. And across the kind of overall breakdown in terms of the number of characters as opposed to the number of actors, it was again quite close. Across the 183 plays, there were 309 parts for women and 319 parts for men. The plays with the largest casts were interesting. The first top one was an Irish language play that was produced on PLAYOGRAPHYIreland. And indeed Barney was also produced at on PLAYOGRAPHY. There were 30 actors in that. There were actually about 90 parts. They each played about 3 parts each. But again, when you're including the Irish language plays, we had some different parameters because some of them are semi-professional, whereas all of the English language productions are entirely professional. So you would have some members of An Taibhdearc company, but the Irish language repertoire and the English language repertoire in some places had to be treated slightly differently. And then the other ones listed here again are Manus and the Mighty Dragon, which was the Abbey in 1976, the Cat's Opera, also the Abbey in 1981, and Alice in Wonderland, which was at the Focus, Mary Elizabeth Burke Kennedy in 1979.
Conscious of time now, so I know people have to go to a show at 6:30.
That's your...
Well, on design, I mean, we just listed them. Often what happens when we look at the playography project in general, there's a lot of crossover between set and costumes, or lighting and set. Rarely lighting and costumes, but the only person who seems to cross over there is Carl Patera. And the other thing that's interesting is that in reality, there's very few women. I mean, there's always more women than men in the costume end, but across the other 3, there aren't really that many women design disciplines. Next one. So these are the most prolific production companies based in our plays, based on the information we have. And we put the years in so that you can see that earlier period, who the companies were, and you can see this, so that's why Delta's there. Mostly working in the Irish language, as you probably know. But you can see the spread of companies over the years, and
the Abbey is the only one that has survived the 40-year period. So, and others have come and gone for different reasons, funding reasons, or just people moved on to other parts of the theatre sector. But the interesting thing about this is that it has a very nice geographical spread.
Yes. So we're going to show you that now. Yes.
So this
information has a lot of gaps. So this information may change when you all come back to us and fill out some of the gaps for us. So from what we have now, we know that 31% of the old plays, these 181 plays, premiered in schools. And so we thought that stat was worth bringing to you for this period, for this age group. And then you can see the spread around Ireland.
So the gaps in the information that we have are quite significant, because with 31% premiered in schools, for example, people might have produced programmes with the sort of information that we require. The focus might have been more on workbooks and education packs, as some of the examples that are here. But for the purposes of the playography, when it was started in 2001, the work for young people and children was always part of the approach we took. It wasn't anything that came later in the process. Work for children has been included from the very beginning of our research phases. The problem is that it's been harder to capture the information than it has for others. And this 31% of premieres in schools would have something to do with that. So while we're presenting here information, hard, fast information on 183 plays, we know that there are probably other plays that we haven't managed to capture, or B, we have some that haven't been put up, aren't live on our database because we can't tell who the director was, or we can't tell who the cast was, or the writer. And one of the purposes of the playography from day one was about not only capturing the repertoire for archival purposes, but in order to try and rejuvenate the repertoire. There are plays in the Irish theatre repertoire that have fallen out of people's memory or awareness, that there's no argument to say that they should never be produced again. And one of the things we're trying to do is to capture the information, identify the writers, find the scripts, make those scripts available so that people might actually be interested in producing the work. And you might say, well, something that was written 40 years ago, what's the relevance to that? We found a flyer the other day from Team Theatre Company, and the piece, it's not here, but the piece was called same job, less pay. It was written and presented by Team Theatre Company in 1976, and nobody can tell me that we're not still talking about the same thing. And it was a play written for women. So there is work out there that we want to try and capture, and you're the kind of audience that we need to engage with in order to try and do so.
And then just to say that when we do get to the point of publishing the findings report, it will come with an appendix which will list the plays by year, so that people can see it, and you can see, you know, that's a checklist as well to make sure we've captured everything. And we found that in the past that this has been the most useful way to present findings, to present the appendix with the plays by year, so that the sector can actually go, yeah, that's right, or it changed. So like an interesting thing was whether or not teams set up in 75 or 76. This was a question we had the other day. But in reality, when we went back to the programme and we found in the initial thing, it turned out, of course, it presented in the November-December 1975 in the Abbey. It actually emerged out of the Abbey, and Joe Dowling, as you know, was very important in the setting up of Team, and then he went in to run the Abbey. So there are very strong links between Team and the Abbey in the early years. But just that sense of us having the conversation with the sector, where the sector can say, guys, those things are missing. So we face real challenges with our research in terms of actually being able to quantify the figures because of needing evidence. And the evidence that we have used to date is we've asked people to send us in their programmes. And in the current world, there's so few people actually creating programmes. So we're now going to have to ask people to send us screen grabs of what you're using online. So then we print them out, and then if you ever come to visit us in ITI, you're all welcome to do that. You'll see we have research presses, and in the presses we have by year and by company a hard copy of the programme as backup. And we really need to do that because there are errors, or people challenge you, and misunderstandings of the class. So we're taking that printed material as being the evidence for it, and we want the premier production. So we're all the time looking for the premier production. So like a tiny anecdote, on the Tom Murphy's Whistle in the Dark, we had an entry for that, where we said that was directed by Joan Littlewood. But many years later, and from that entry going on live on our site, in the last 2 months, we were able to work out that actually it was directed. She didn't direct it. It was on in her theatre, but she didn't direct it, and we've corrected that. But that took a long time. The director had to come and find us and talk to us about it. And this was in other books and other publications. So now we have the programmes, and they're also on site, and we published it recently. So this isn't just in this sector, but this is part of a wider conversation that we're having with the sector about trying to get evidence for the entries.
And just finally, before we go, kind of put a little bit of a call out. What the playography does is it actually charts the development in Irish theatre. It charts what people are writing about, why they're writing about things, the forms they're presenting work in, the rise of devised work, collaborative work, non-authored work. And we're all the time trying to interrogate this. And we invite guest speakers or artists to come in and talk with our playography panel to talk about what is a play, is it a play? And in order to do that, it's about so that we can accurately document the Irish theatre repertoire and stay along with the trends in theatre making, so that the repertoire, the work we're doing, is actually representative of the work that's being made. So we will invite somebody from your sector to come and talk with us, but also on our advisory panel we have a gap in terms of somebody from the Theatre for Young Audiences sector, and perhaps TYA Ireland would have a chat and see if one of your members would be interested in sitting on the Irish Theatre Institute Irish Playography advisory panel, which currently comprises Gina Moxley, Emily Pine, Gavin Costick, Emma Jordan and Deirdre Davitt, who's our Irish language expert. We have a place with Lachlan Deegan, was on, he had to resign because of his Arts Council conflict. So we're looking to fill that space. It involves the onerous duties of 2 meetings a year at ITI. The sandwiches are extraordinary. The conversation is really lively, and we'll even pay your train fares. So maybe at a meeting you might consider, if somebody wants to put themselves forward for a place on that panel, we would really welcome your expert inputs.
So I think in a sense, this is like a visualization of the new work that's being made for children in those age groups. I'm not saying it's 110% accurate, but it's getting there, and it's 90% accurate at this moment in time. And I think down the road, what you're looking at, is we're really hoping is that new entrants into the sector would actually interrogate what's gone on in the past, who the makers were, where they made it, what the plays were, the themes were, and all of that information is gathered in Playography Ireland. So we would hope that also that academics and other researchers would also engage in it, as we do with playography. So just energise it, animate it, and of course the joy would be if plays are found again, and the scripts are available on e-plays.
Mark, did you want to say something?
I'd love to expand, because 6, 7 are shown.
Yeah.
Because
they're non-verbal. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that they're in any way less than the others.
Absolutely, yeah.
So even if there was a chance to have extra plays of shows that are not within the as it stands now, then find a way to. It's great to have it doesn't show, particularly the last 10 years doesn't show a lot of work.
Yes, absolutely.
That's it,
absolutely. We completely know that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we would want somebody to come and have that conversation with us, so we can interrogate it and find a methodology around that.
I mean, just gathering the information is a huge piece of work, just even for the plays. There was a time when everything would get reviewed and you'd hear about it, but things were not being reviewed now. It actually poses other challenges to try to get the information. 18 months less.
Just in addition to that, and outside the context too, if there is an additional spot in the design, I always think that stage managers, touring people, are people who hold the memory of a lot of work in Tyndale, programs for Tyndale, and I think there's a huge connection and network among stage managers where you can actually find an awful lot of oral history that support what you think. So it might be worth
Good idea. Okay, if nobody else has anything, it's hard to make statistics sexy at 6 o'clock in the evening.
Absolutely. Sorry.
One question, the map of the premieres. There was, I can understand why all the peaks are at certain places except for County Antrim. Is that a particular company?
Yes,
Yes.
it is.
In
Post-Ledgers.
Antrim, that's Foods and Replay.
Yeah. I would encourage you all to come and look at this material. These are from some of the earlier companies and some current companies. Absolutely beautiful selection of graphics and materials. So please, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.